this. Marvellous. There we go. I'll start that spiel again, shall I? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Fake Accents Unite. I'm joined here, of course, by my ever-present co-host, the Britisher.
Who is very tempted not to say anything in order to confuse you and make you wonder whether we're still muted.
Oh, for goodness sake, Britisher. You monster, you.
Hello there, how are we doing?
We're doing alright. I'm doing alright anyway. We've been away a while. It's been, what is it, 2 weeks? 2 weeks since the last show? 3 weeks nearly?
I don't know. Did we miss? I mean, we missed the one last week. Did we miss the one before that?
Yes, we missed the one last week because it was my dissertation's final week, and we missed the one before then because you were out of sorts.
Oh, was I half dead again at some point?
You appear to have thoroughly.
That happens with that's what happens with such frequency. You can't expect me to remember these things.
You thoroughly scuppered yourself, sir. That's what we were told, led to believe at least. Of course, in reality, your gambling habit had gone out of hand, and you.
No doubt. I mean, you had lost it all on the GGs again.
And you had to go and John Wick the Mafia.
Give some blood. Yes, I had to go and give some blood. Yes, in order to make some money.
It wasn't your blood.
No, oh well, of course not. No.
No. Lovely to see some of the regulars in chat there. Tom of Loxley, Eyeball Kid, Matchstick, and the Right Honourable Fez. Pleasure to have you with us. The last couple of weeks have been kind of strange, as I say, because, aside from me being Britisher being out of commission at the beginning, and me being not out of commission but too busy, unfortunately, towards the end, but I am now finished with my degree studies. I have 2 assessments remaining. So hopefully I can put in some time and hopefully create some content. I know I say this frequently, and my upload schedule is less regular than a newborn's leavings. But
I don't think anybody has an upload schedule anymore these days. I think YouTube has seen to that.
I think there are people out there who manage daily uploads, Britisher, but I'm not one of them. That's all I'll say.
Well, I mean, those are people who either have teams or who just basically speak into the microphone.
Yes, they're hardcore editing people, less so. I did notice that King Crocoduck came back recently. Do you know him?
I remember him. Yes.
Yes, he started a series which never got finished called The Science Wars, which was very enjoyable, and then disappeared off into the ether and has returned back because he's having a bit of a spat with Christy Winters, as it were. It's almost like living in 2015 again, you know.
I can't have a spat with Christy Winters. I'm blocked by the Right Honourable Lady.
It sounds like you had a spat already then.
No, actually, no. I think it's one of those where you can really get blocked without necessarily having a spat.
Well, he's responding to her response to his video, so it's going to. But no,
I mean, it was his video, the first video which he responded to. Was that particularly successful?
I have no idea. I'll double check now.
Well, because Christy Winters does strike me as sort of how do we say? I don't mean this in the entirely negative way when I say a parasite. I mean, she basically lives off having controversies with other people. I mean, chiefest among them bearing. So basically, if nobody is commenting about her and she is not taking offense to something somebody else is saying, she doesn't really have much to do. At least that's how I remember her. I mean, it's a long time since I watched any content of hers. So yes, I remember. There was a time when pretty much she was reacting to reactions from Sargon and Bering and whatever. But that was just it. These were all videos that actually generated a lot of views on the Sargon and Bering side. Right. That's why I was wondering if Crocoduck had perhaps had a particularly successful video and therefore she piggybacked off it.
I don't think so. But his series of videos as well is not very sensationalized. I say that
Mhm.
he's basically created 3 videos. One is the return of the king, and the other is nuking social constructionism. But I mean, they're doing fairly well. But no, I've never watched a Christy Winters video. I know her. I can't even picture her face. I know her as that Bint from 2016 who everybody had a bit of a clash with, and there was issues with notably Kraut and a few other figures who are no longer relevant. So
She had a way of falling out with everybody, but always in a manner of, well, speaking as an academic, which the others are not. I would like to point out that I'm right, because I've read such and such a book, and given that I can quote this paragraph, it shows that clearly I'm right. And you just felt, yeah, I can see where you're coming from here.
but did she quote a series of paragraphs which were also underpinned by sound methodological, for goodness sake, methodology?
I mean, I think, given that you haven't watched anything of hers or whatever, you have to understand that all people she will quote will be people who are academics in a field that has studies at the end of it.
Right. I mean,
and if you now wish to deride those particular areas of study, then you're a bigot.
It's an incredibly frustrating one. One of the things which has become very apparent to me over the course of my degree is, one, how little consensus there really is. 2, the tendency of scientific communities to gather behind particular theories and then claim it's a meta theory to the exclusion of all else. And then thirdly, how this is compounded in the social sciences, where their most predominant meta theories have come from non-psychologists, as it were. If you look at people like Freud, for instance, and the psychoanalytic movement, well, he didn't start out as a psychologist and that sort of thing, and many of the great figures of psychology are kind of, how shall I put it, stolen or kind of cobbled together. It's a very cobbled together discipline. This is not to say that there isn't sound science in there in some cases, but it's very few and far between. And the other issue with it happens to be that basically psychology research seems to work best on an individual level. So if you're able to produce it's a little bit art, a little bit science, but utilizing several techniques which have been shown to work not en masse but have shown some development, can be useful. But of course, because there's so many models and so many of these little let's call them programs, they would call them interventions, which have been developed, and with varying success and usually very little clarity on how successful they are and what populations they're successful in and why. It becomes a bit of a guessing game, and so that's why I say it's more art. There's art in there as well, because you've got to be able to select the different things which are most appropriate for the client. However, most psychologists are not taught this, they're not selected for this, and they're not very good at it, which is again one of the reasons why several friends of mine who have been to therapists have complained about the cookie cutter nature of the whole thing. Do you know what I mean? The kind of rampant sort of just take this form and go home and do some exercises rather than creating or doing something constructive.
I understand what you mean insofar that there's an element of art. I mean, I think what one is almost looking for in someone like that is a degree of wisdom. of knowing humans as opposed to knowing what a psychology book says.
Yes. Well, this is one of the reasons why psychoanalysis, for instance, has stuck around as long as it has, right? So, whilst it's derided constantly by purveyors of something like CBT, as pseudoscientific, it's nonsense, it's mumbo jumbo, what is this thing that you're doing? Dream interpretation, that sounds insane, all that stuff. But they're obviously pointing out the more extreme examples of it. But when it comes down to it, a lot of what psychology is in the modern era, at least in terms of the scientific side, is expressing things that everybody knows in language that very few people understand. And so because of that, it's important to recognise that the psychoanalysts, if you can be good psychoanalysts, if they effectively understand the human condition better than the literature would currently suggest, because the literature is very far behind on a lot of these things. I mean, it has some interesting, in the scientific side, it has some interesting options where it marries up with things like neuroscience and cognitive science, where there are people out there doing cognitive psychology who are trying to understand the conceptual mechanisms.
To make this a little more light-hearted, can I ask you something? Have you ever seen the series Frasier?
This seems a little of a leap, but okay. No, I haven't. No, I haven't seen Frasier.
Well, because you see, I think I would like to know what you would make of that, because Frasier is a radio psychologist.
Okay.
So basically, he's the guy that gets called by people who have a sufficiently interesting problem that the producer will let them through.
So he's an agony uncle.
And very often, these are actually cameos by other well-known actors.
All right.
And at the same time, Frasier, of course, has his brother, Niles, who also has gone into psychology, who has, every few episodes he has another sort of derogative comment to make about pop psychology as used by radio presenters. And it would sort of tickle me what you made of some of the examples that are being used and some of the things that they're saying. So, for example, once Niles has to stand in for Frasier because Frasier has got a bad flu or something like that, and Niles turns up at the studio, sits himself down. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am sitting in for my brother Frasier. But let's make one thing clear right from the start. Whereas you will no doubt be aware of the fact that my brother is a Freudian, I am a Jungian. So there will be no blaming mother today. It's just...
Oh dear!
I don't know.
That's quite funny, given that from a professional standpoint, Jung is a development and was a student of Freud's work, and they're both psychoanalysts. So...
I think they ended up writing rather, let's say, pithy letters to each other. I think they got on well at the beginning and then gradually fell out.
Sort of like a reverse Red Dwarf in that regard, then.
But no, I just thought, it might introduce an element of levity to look at sort of psychology from a more humorous aspect before you lose yourself in too much technicality. Because yes, that one has some sort of interesting angles at times, and I could well imagine that it is particularly amusing to anybody who has actually done a bit of psychology. To kind of see some of the elementary mistakes that Frasier sometimes does. When he's referring to the guy with the identity crisis by the wrong name and things like that,
Well, British, this might be the first reasonable suggestion you've ever made on this channel, in terms of...
yes, watch Frasier. No, in any case, you can't really go wrong with Frasier. Frasier is one of the best sitcoms ever made, possibly the best sitcom.
I mean, you say that sitcoms in general isn't a very high bar, but yes, I mean, I'll check it out. Sure, I'll give
I
it.
mean, Red Dwarf is a sitcom, so is Blackadder, and you rate
Shh!
them very highly.
Don't you bring facts and logic into this
So,
debate?
I would say, Frasier I regard as the sort of almost ultimate evolution of the sitcom. That it's the one that comes towards the end when they've learned all, when they're sort of a rather, the Americans have these large writing teams when it comes to their sitcoms. I think quite a few Britons were involved in the writing of Frasier. And you can see sort of them marrying American and British traditions together.
And you base this
And
on what?
they've learned from the decades that have gone before, and it's highly, highly enjoyable. I can only recommend it.
All right, Rich. I would take that. Maybe I can get through an episode by the end of next week, by the beginning of next week, even, and we'll talk about it.
Well, if you're not hooked after the first episode, or at least after episode 3, when Niles meets Daphne, if you're not hooked after that, you're more than likely not human.
Well, I've never been accused of being human before, Britisher, so
Well, there is that.
we'll see how that
Well,
goes.
yes, I do recall that most of the ladies from the netball teams refer to you as the Beast.
What is this? Attempt to build not so obvious lore that I'm just constantly surrounded by lithe, supine athletes at all times. So again, more people filtering in now. Lovely to see people like Mira J. Always lovely. Tom of Loxley. Eric Kai says, "Are you moving near Carl, Mark?" Oh yes, I should probably explain what's going on with the way things are
Oh
going.
yes, you mentioned that you were looking for new shores, basically.
Well, so to bring a bit of real life into this, and I apologise to everyone who's not that interested in my own personal goings on, but so my degree is coming to an end in 2 weeks. Once that is finished, I need to find myself a job, and I need to have found a new place to live before the 29th of May, which is also affordable within the range of that job. So I've had an interview already. I've got one job offer and another interview tomorrow. But I was tempted to look at property in near a certain Carl of Swindon, because the team which works under him is very keen to have me on as either a co-host or certainly producing content for Lotus Eaters, for instance. Carl himself is less convinced, judging by the red receipts that I've been left on. I offered to go down there and do a test day and that sort of thing, but I think because he's already got one psychologist, he's potentially not that interested in another one, considering the added value. And fair play to Carl. I'm not throwing shade or anything like this or trying to throw him under the bus, but it's just a case of that is the reality of things. But other than that, I'm looking at things. Although I don't particularly want to become a digital marketing consultant, it wasn't exactly my first choice. But it's an interesting.
What is a digital marketing consultant?
Somebody who, in the vaguest possible terms, it's someone who helps meet business needs for ad campaigns for other companies in the business of business. It does sound quite interesting. Now I've had the interview and I had a chat with a chap who is running it. It was quite good, but I don't know if I'll take it yet because I've got some other, as I say, some other offers to consider and that sort of thing. But it's a very nice company, is what I would say. So I think I'd get on with the people who are working there, and it would be a nice entryway into some sort of career. But given that my initial plans to build experience over the past year and
so that is sort of a definite maybe. Shall we put it like that?
Definitely.
So the question we can throw out to the chat, therefore, is where should Not So Obvious go and why?
Where should the Isle of Sheppey, and just for no reason at all.
I would of course love to know which is the most profoundly SNP voting constituency in Scotland, and then we can sort of send you up there to set up a English flag weaving business.
Oh my god. Well, you can imagine that they would evict me as soon as they actually attain independence under the new leadership of Count Dankula as he goes for...
Well, I think just the moment they would actually hear your fake accent, that would be enough.
I don't think... my accent is fake compared to where I grew up, but I don't know if I could call it fake. Like, I can't do a convincing Scottish accent, certainly. Sorry, just to assuage some doubts in the comments from people who are saying, don't leave the channel and that sort of thing. There's no plans to do that. The fake accents will continue as it has always done, with no gaps at all, because we don't take breaks, obviously.
Oh, never.
Never. And the Don't expect consistency from this channel when it comes to our own statements on these things.
Well, let's put it like this: there will be no inconsistency within our inconsistency.
But yes,
we will remain consistently inconsistent. Is that fair?
Consistently inconsistent. But yes, if anybody knows of any work in the London area, or if they want to go and harass Lotus Eaters and say, there's this guy Not So Obvious who we're really keen to see on the show as a co-host, then please feel free to do so. Obviously don't harass them, just mention it, and then maybe it'll perk some ears up, and that could also be a potential option. The money itself is not an issue for me if I work for them, because of course the area is a lot cheaper than I'm currently living in. It's very frustrating when you're looking at something which is described as a spacious 2-bedroom flat, for instance, and it's in the region of £2,500, including bills and council tax per month. So yeah, let's see if we
the joys of city living.
The joys of
that what you're saying?
There was an article which came out, which is the other day on the Telegraph, actually, which was talking about what will happen to Canary Wharf, because Canary Wharf is obviously the financial centre of London now, pretty much. That's where all the new startups go, and it's also home to it's like a huge area under development. And typically, when that is working, there's 150,000 people who work there daily. But of course, with the furloughs and with many businesses realising that office space is more expensive than having everybody working in home offices, the number of people who are currently working there daily is 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, I remember Canary Wharf being in a complete broke status. I remember one of their towers was even half built, because the whole thing went belly up, and they had the steel structure up, but the sort of cladding and windows only went halfway up the height of the building.
Oh wow!
And then that's when everything fell apart. A lot of people sort of look back and sort of think, oh well, Canary Wharf was sort of one of Margaret Thatcher's brainwaves, and look at it now, it's all wonderful. Well, actually, yes, it eventually went the way it was hoped to go, but it didn't go smoothly. So I think just about everybody involved with it at the beginning lost all their money. It went bad, and it went bad really terribly. So not only the big blocks for all the financial companies, but also all the sort of support buildings, various residential blocks and whatever that had gone around it. All of them also went broke. So it was absolute financial wipeout on a colossal scale. So what you see now is what has effectively been rebuilt from, whatever price one had to pay the administrators at some point.
From the ashes.
So yes, it's sort of an interesting development when it comes to Canary Wharf, that now everybody's looking at it and saying, oh well, here is the thriving financial centre of London. If you go back, say, 30 years, it looked really grim.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen. Obviously, I live in the Greenwich area, at least for the time being, and it's amazing. There's a whole set of photographs which are available of the area before it was all developed, sort of, say, 30, 40 years ago, and it's insane how much development has gone on in that time. The
Yeah.
But of course, they're worried with this dramatic reduction in traffic. I think they're only clocking 22,000 people through the station a day or something like that, which is very low for what's supposed to be one of the busiest sectors of London.
Sort of the Docklands Light Railway, isn't it?
Yes. Well, there's the Docklands Light Railway and there's the Jubilee Line. So
Okay. Yeah.
the sort of coming in from Stratford and that sort of area, but the crux of it is there's all these businesses which kind of rely on what I'd call the business lunch sector.
Mm-hmm.
So all the
Just
pubs,
basic footfall.
yes, the boutiques, the shops. It's basically, if you've never been to Canary Wharf, it's a bit like walking through a duty free where everything's been marked up by about 200%. So it's a lovely area now that it's been developed. It's obviously on the water and everything, but I don't know what's going to happen. So their thinking is now we'll develop all of the new office buildings which have not yet been designated office space because they're still under construction, and we'll designate them as housing units and convert all these corner offices we had planned into luxury flats, and then the financial people who are now working from home from cheaper areas will want to live near all the things where they can do their business lunches, but they can still work from home, so they can still use the businesses down below. Whether or not it works remains to be seen, obviously, but it's going to be
otherwise we just get Canary Wharf goes broke 2.0.
Exactly. And what happens then? Because a lot of businesses which are still paying rents on offices and that sort of thing, they all disappear, and it's one of those little fallouts where it's not those businesses which suffer because those businesses have still got all their employees working from home. No, the businesses that suffer are all of the little man jobs who are working. Well,
it's a bit like with the railway stations. You pretty much can't find a single major railway station in which there isn't some chap with a sort of trolley selling hot coffee and buns or something like that. But if, of course, you then suddenly, stop having most travel, whoever that poor chap is, even if he's allowed to trade, he ends up standing there with absolutely nothing to sell. He'll go there in order to sell half a dozen coffees a day, which doesn't even pay for him starting up his trolley, if you know what I mean, in the morning.
Yeah.
So yes, there are all these sort of almost sort of auxiliary services that largely depend on a lot of footfall, and on which actually a lot of the rest of business depends normally. I mean, you can't run a business if there isn't anybody to, sell your staff lunch or anything like that.
Yes.
So there is a sort of symbiotic relationship. But if everybody suddenly stays at home, well, yes, then you've got a major problem. But in all fairness, there has been, hasn't there, in the pipeline, that there's been this claim that sooner or later, due to emerging technology, a lot of people will end up working from home anyway. And It's been sort of seen almost like nuclear fusion, where everybody has always been saying, oh, it's 20 years away, but it's coming. It's definitely going to happen. And then it's never happened. It's always been another 20 years away.
Well,
the same thing with everybody working from home. It's always been seen as, well, sooner or later this is bound to happen due to all these internet connections and whatever. But it's never actually come about so far.
But I've worked out why it is, Britisher. It's very obvious, in fact, to anyone who doesn't, own some kind of enormous property as to why this is. The majority of workers in London are living in shared accommodation. They don't have access to any space other than their bedroom. If they have a shared living space, it's shared, so they can't work there. For instance, not everyone has their own office space, and believe it or not, it's actually miserable working from the same room in which you eat, sleep, and play. Absolutely miserable.
So what you are saying is this is a 21st century prison.
No, well, I wouldn't go so far as to call it a prison. It's just a miserable state of affairs. It's like, yes, you've got good internet. Yes, you can do everything remotely. But why would you want to? It's really hard to motivate yourself when you're living at home, because you've got all the distractions of home, which is why home offices exist as a concept in general. Anyway, you only go in there to work. You don't go in there when you're not working. And then you've got like everyone else who's just sitting there and going, I don't want to move get up in the morning, have breakfast, move 4 feet to my desk, and immediately start working at the computer.
I don't know.
So
it depends. It depends what your journey is, isn't it? I mean, if your journey consists of standing in a commuter train for an hour every day, there and back, then perhaps just sitting down at your desk at home may be preferable. Because I mean, I think we're all aware of the fact that there is this sort of massive migration in and out of London every single day, and because the railway systems barely cope. I mean, I think that's why they introduced Crossrail, wasn't it, in an attempt to try and sort of free up some bottlenecks. That's why I think a lot of people would sort of refer to it as almost sort of a soul-crushing routine of having to traipse in and out of London without even a seat to park your bum on, because it's just everything's full to capacity.
I certainly had that experience with when I was living in Bethnal Green and trying to get a train at 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. But at the same time, you kind of it's more about, do you want to, whilst you can complain about the commute, when you get to the office you're at the office and therefore you're in office mode, it requires a lot more discipline to get up at home and say and do your work there than it does to do it when you're in a space which is designed for working. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. I know exactly what you mean. At home you may be subject to myriad distractions, but I just suspect that there is a strong trend that a lot of this is more than likely going to happen, that this way or that. I mean, we are sort of hitting new boundaries. I don't know if you heard that. What is it? I think Amazon with its drivers, but so too I think also some call center companies, which is perhaps more pertinent in this case. They were kind of asking people to sign contracts whereby they would have to have their webcams on, so that AI over webcams could monitor that they're actually doing some work.
Ugh, that's horrific.
And in the case of Amazon, of course, they wanted a camera in the vans at all times to be running, and they needed a permission by the drivers. So they would effectively tell the drivers, you either sign this or you're fired. But yes, when it comes to
they still do that.
Sorry?
They do that, yes.
Yes, I believe in Amazon vans now they are pretty much filming them at all time, so that AI can effectively monitor their productivity. They
effectively have this their own version of a phone, which is just Amazon specific, which is their own map system, because they don't use local postcodes. They've got their own postcode system, and then a series of effectively captures that the drivers have to do, which are all image-based because 70% of the drivers in Amazon driving don't speak a word of English. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, there's, in a way, one can almost say this is sort of the ultimate step from the beginnings of Henry Ford. Are you familiar with Henry Ford? Did a lot of time and motion studies in order to sort of up productivity.
No.
Well, I mean, Henry Ford is the guy who invented the moving assembly line for, Ford to build Ford cars.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
And, there is, I think, still footage available of where he kind of films 2 or 3 workers in a yard. And then obviously it's later watched almost sped up in order to see how these workers move, and is there any way we could perhaps rearrange the goods so that they have to move less and can therefore assemble more wheels in the same time and such. So he was famous for that. But at the same time, of course, he was the one that kind of reduced a lot of his workers to these sort of drudges, whereby they would just,
Well, it's mindless.
They would just stand there at an assembly line and tighten the bolt all day. And no sooner had they tightened a bolt, a new bolt that needed tightening would emerge, if you know what I mean. And famously, Charlie Chaplin made a film in which he is working on the assembly line, and eventually kind of, it's almost as if he sort of falls into a trance in which he's doing nothing else but tightening bolts, and he gets dragged into the machinery, and he's being sort of wound through these cogs and whatever, and he's still tightening every bolt that comes into view. He can't stop anymore. And yes, I think now that we've got companies insisting that they should be able to film you in order to oversee your productivity, you're kind, and then to top it all, to then be monitored by AI, it kind of shows how the sort of new technology can be both a godsend and absolute hell on earth. I heard also I think I heard this on the BBC. There was some Uber drivers, I think, who had to provide some kind of image once in a while. I think that's what you're referring to with Amazon, that you pretty much have to have some kind of shot of yourself once in a while that feeds the AI. And what they found is that this AI is not very good at recognizing people who are of, well, let's say non-white extraction.
Right.
And therefore quite a few drivers were basically being told by, you're fired, you'll never work for us again because you've tried to cheat the system. What you provided was a picture of a picture.
Oh my goodness.
And they're going, no, we didn't. We did what we were required. We took a shot of ourselves, a selfie with the camera and of course all this stuff is monitored by AI, and if the AI thinks that it is somehow not looking at a face, or at a face that is somehow distorted or something like that, then it basically just says, no, this isn't going, you're out. And
sounds like action for lawsuits.
Just like with YouTube, of course, you then can't appeal because you're then just talking to a machine, and there's no way of getting through to a real person. And eventually, I think because the BBC started looking into it, suddenly Uber were willing to talk. But prior to that, they were just very, very high-handed and saying, no, that's it. No, you're out. And some of these people were saying, look, we drive, for a living, and this is pretty much our work. And now you've just cut us off because some piece of software isn't recognizing our face. What are we supposed to do? So, yes, I think there are still plenty of gremlins in the system. But, yes, when it comes to it, I think, work is changing. And I could well imagine that a lot of office space will be knocked on the head. Because in a lot of offices in which people pretty much do nothing else but hold meetings, the question is, why do you all need to be there to hold meetings if you can talk to each other on Zoom?
Well, there's another one which is it's shamelessly stolen from Dilbert. Do you know Dilbert?
Mm-hmm.
Where it says the boss is there. He says, "I want to talk to you about this contract. Let's schedule a Zoom call." And he's like, "Well, do we really need to have a Zoom call? Could we do it via voice call instead?" He says, "Well, I don't see why not. I suppose we could do a voice call." And he's like, "And well, if it could be done over a voice call, have you heard of this thing called email?" He goes, "Yes, I suppose I could write it in an email." He's like, "All right, we're getting somewhere. Have you heard of this thing called texting?" it's just,
and eventually they just send each other a letter. Yes.
Yeah, a text. Yeah. So that's the jazz with that. Right. There are some super chats which come in. Tim Cornish says, "Never mix Niles and Daphne with the word glockenspiel."
Glockenspiel, yes. My glockenspiel has sprung to life. And of course, you have absolutely no idea what we're talking about.
None
do you? Not
whatsoever, but I assume that it is related to Frasier. So, there we go.
It appears in the series Frasier, yes. Put it like this, Niles and Daphne is one of the funniest man pining for woman relationships that you will more than likely ever see in a sitcom. That in episode, you always have to consider they made well over 200 episodes of this series, and he meets her in episode 3, and instantly he is smitten. And I think one also has to admit that there was chemistry between the two actors, and that's why it worked. But yes, you just get this pathetic, obsessed. Oh my God, here she is. Whenever she moves through the room, and to be able to maintain that for the length of time they did is a masterpiece. But yes, when you then get expressions like "my glockenspiel has sprung to life," yes, it's. Just watch it. Just watch it, not so obvious.
Okay.
And just in case anybody tries to cut this is not my giving him a warning. Just watch it, not so obvious. This is my insisting he watch Frasier.
I mean, that's very optimistic of you, assuming anyone would want to cut our show, British.
Yes. The amount of incriminating material that we'd be able to gather over. How many episodes have we done by now?
100. This is 126.
Oh dear God, we're doomed. If anybody ever sits down and starts cutting stuff, we're just doomed, aren't we?
Well, certainly we are at the stage. We're over 2 years into this, I'm afraid, my boy.
That's before we even start mentioning, the various things they'll be able to concoct about you and these various netball teams.
You stop trying to make the netball meme a reality. Oh dear. So,
the amount of angry boyfriends that will be descending upon whatever place it is you decide to settle in the end. I mean, one dare not think about it.
It's a good thing I'm so Chad that I can fight them off. It's very Neo from the Matrix Returns, or whatever it's called. Revolutions. So, let's go.
Aren't they making some more of that?
Oh, probably, but I don't want to watch
I
them.
heard that they were making some more Matrix, which, given that I only ever liked the first one and never understood why they made sequels, yes.
Well, the first one was a ridiculously massive success, and for good reason. And the second two were much. Whilst the second one is just one long fight scene, and the third one tries to tie up loose ends and generates more questions than it answers.
They're all long fight scenes, but then they have these breaks in which somebody has to try and explain to you what the hell is going on.
I mean, only for stupid people, Bridger.
That is the worst. That is the worst way in which you can kind of make a film. You're supposed to be able to deduce from the action and from the dialogue as to what is happening and why. The moment somebody has to actually sit down and give you a 2-3 minute explanation, that's when you know that the plot is in difficulty.
I leave it to that. I enjoyed them, but like the first one I enjoyed because it's just it was an instant classic. It's so funny to watch now as well with just there was this kind of sweet spot, wasn't there, in cinema where science fiction was still, but it was before the era of the smartphone had even been conceptualized, and so all of the tech was effectively old tech. I mean, you look, it's kind of techno futurism, but it's none of it's hyper developed. It's all old.
Yeah,
stuff.
I mean, they still had to try and get to a phone booth, didn't they?
Well, and of course the machines are saying, well, I do like the fact that they had this kind of key moment when they said, we set it to the peak of your civilization, because as soon as we started running everything, it was our civilization, which kind of got around the whole, why is it not 2020 rather than 2001 or whenever it was, but or the 90s. I think it was older than that. Yeah, it's the 90s. But basically the kind of thing where they're sitting there, and of course in the future, that because they're behind the times, they can't develop at the same speed. They've got this weird kind of thing where they've got guns which fire electricity, but they're using what look like Dell chunky screens, and they've got touch screens, but they're clearly all resistive, and they're all using interfaces which are clearly from the 90s, so but I love the aesthetic of that. That was really good. It was also one of the things which was really enjoyable about the kind of physical stuff in Alien, for instance. They're all using this kind of almost ramshackle but also functional stuff with lots of physical switches and that sort of thing. I like all that. That's good to me.
Sort of fantasy, futuristic, basic industry, sort of mechanisms. Yes.
And of course, they've got, in the Matrix in particular, they've got this idea of, we need to make phones. We've got to make the phone cool because it's a central premise, right? And we can't just have phone booths, but we need mobile phones, and of course, mobile phones being relatively new. But of course, it needs a button on the side that makes a clicky noise and it snaps open, and then they can use that. And everyone was like, "Oh yeah, I want a Matrix phone."
Well, if I remember rightly, I heard that they want to make more episodes. Why, I don't know, because I think everybody hates the next two they made. But this time round, because I believe one of the writers is now trans, they insist that one of the characters in it was trans all along anyway. So now they will have trans characters in the future Matrix. Whatever parts that is they make.
Well, of course. So the original films were directed by the Wachowski brothers, as were then, who are now the Wachowski sisters.
Oh well, there you go.
And so the idea is that they claim post hoc that their film is all about trans issues. The red and the blue pill represent estrogen that they had to get on the black market. It's all about transcending the body that you are in to become the body that you actually are. The character of Switch, I don't know if you remember, minor character from the first film, the sort of blonde pixie cut woman who wears white. She was originally supposed to be, I think, a man on the outside and a woman on the inside, or the other way around. So that to show that there's flexibility in the Matrix in the way that you see yourself, but the studio, I think, rebutted that as it being too confusing for audience members at the time.
Yeah, if I remember rightly, the woman in the red dress was not trans.
No. She was a simulation, according to the film. But she, of course, would be the thing.
If I remember rightly, one guy, the one who had created her, who basically could organise you some time with her.
Yeah, the mouse was the one who coded her. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you even know the names. I have absolutely no idea. As far as I'm concerned, it was just a film I once saw and I thought was very good. particularly because it was based on such an interesting premise.
Well,
it was the kind of film you'd never seen anything like before.
Yeah, well, they utilise so many revolutionary techniques. I mean, there's the iconic now, which has been done to death, the slow motion pan around, the character in it, but with the kick. And they were the first people, because the way they did that was they got an array of cameras all recording the same scene at the same time, and then it's effectively a seamless transition between all of the different shots.
You can choose which camera you jump to. No.
Well, it's just it blends them all together, so you're effectively...
No, I know, but what happens is you can basically you can start moving from the camera you're at to the camera to the left, and then to the left of that, and to the left of that, to the left of that, over various frames, and like that you get motion in that regard at the same time as the thing is moving in front of you.
Yes, absolutely. So very cool, and of course bullet time was invented, with the bullet trails and whatnot with the Matrix. And of course the action was on. I did see a parody of the fight scene in the train station at the end, where there's a moment in that fight where Neo punches at him, his fist gets caught, so he sticks his hand out and quite ridiculously hits the guy in the throat, and Agent Smith goes like that, and somebody has edited that scene so that every time Neo throws a punch, he hits him in the throat. And then it just makes that stupid noise.
It has, in a way, The Matrix has created its own trope in the same way as kung fu films, particularly Chinese mainland kung fu films have, whereby, every single fight scene now is some highly choreographed dance, to the point where everything inside you sinks, and you just go, oh, here we go again. Once upon a time, someone would have just punched someone else, and that would have been the end of it. Now there has to be this over-elaborate, ludicrous thing in which one tries to make any actor look as if they're Bruce Lee. In the same way that even if you have a documentary by China, on something like the Mongols being overthrown or something like that, any hand-to-hand combat that they show to illustrate the capture of a certain castle or something like that invariably has some prolonged kung fu fighting scene in it where you just go, oh, for the love of God, please, this is not what warfare looks like, and it never did.
They've also, I mean, to take an example, like a film like Lord of the Rings, which is heavily choreographed, obviously, with their fight scenes and everything. But what is also choreographed into there is the different skill levels of the different characters. So whilst you've got, Legolas jumping around from pillar to pillar and shooting people with arrows, you've also got Samwise Gamgee, who's scrabbling around on the floor, looking for his, just about manages to get a frying pan up to bong someone on the face, and that sort of thing. And one of the things which is really missing, especially in the kind of what I'd call the progressive era of filmmaking, is you're not allowed now to give, particularly if you've got a strong female character, you're not allowed to give them any flaws. So when it comes to the fighting, they're never losing the fight at any point, really. There are times...
They're at least holding their own.
There's times where they have to defend themselves against, an onslaught of things. But they're never really, put in... As far as I can tell, anyway, they're not really put in any danger. And also, there is this kind of a placement of competence where it's just utterly disbelievable. I will reference the Mulan remake, which I've only seen clips of, but they introduced obviously, the original film, the cartoon, is about the woman who's struggling and trying to find her place in the army as she goes along, and is masquerading as a man, and the only reason why she succeeds, she's got quite a keen mind, so she comes up with unique solutions to difficult problems because she's not the strongest and she's not the fastest, and she struggles with a lot of the training, and they're all crap at the beginning. And then in the live action remake, they turn her into some kind of, like, they add some kind of weird, bizarre magic element of chi to it, and suddenly she can do all this crazy, flippy kung fu nonsense, which she was never able to do because it would have made the story utterly unbelievable. And it does. And one of the
what I would reference as an example there would be Keira Knightley in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh, she who could not be killed.
So you have these, you have got pirates who kind of look like Arnold Schwarzenegger's big brother, sort of swiping at her, hacking at her with cutlasses. And you have got this sort of spindly wrist holding a sword, just parrying everything as though it's nothing. And you just go, yeah, that's not really how physics works. If somebody who is in a completely different weight class comes at you, you really have got serious problems just holding up a sword and parrying it. I mean, at least in something like The Highlander, where the opponent, who is, humongous compared to the hero, kind of brings his sword down with full force. It pretty much buckles the other guy's knees, so there's a reference to that, as in, okay, the other guy is much more powerful than our man here. Whereas when you get these sort of super vixens in as you would say, the progressive era of films, suddenly these rules don't seem to apply. So you can have a woman who is perhaps of the same body mass as someone like Woody Allen, but now she suddenly stands up to Vin Diesel, and we're just supposed to believe it. And how do we say? It's a strange art, isn't it? I mean, maybe it's a generational thing. I don't know. Because everything in film really is about suspension of disbelief. You know full well that everything you're looking at is a complete fiction, and that when Roger Moore is fighting Jaws as James Bond in these various films, he more than likely in reality wouldn't stand a chance. But at least he's breaking sweat trying to overcome this beast of a man. But in recent films, with this phenomenon of what people refer to as the Mary Sue, it seems as if a lot of millennials don't have a problem with suspension of disbelief in that regard. Whereas perhaps it's a generational thing. Perhaps it is older folk who look at it and just go, oh, come on. Because somehow we've not been conditioned to suspend disbelief in that regard. I don't know.
It's one of those things where, because of course people who defend the Mary Sue phenomena go, well, you've got all these 80s action stars, Stallone and Schwarzenegger and whatnot, who all go through ridiculous odds, the stuff, people that Bruce Willis has played and all sorts of it, and you just go, well, yeah, but at the same time, like, what's their kind of claim to fame? They're bigger than everybody else. The films, the plot lines are very campy. They're almost ridiculous. They're designed.
They're tongue in cheek. There's a sort of a glint in the eye in a lot of those scenes where everybody knows it's ridiculous.
Nobody is looking at Schwarzenegger in Conan and going, "This is a historical narrative." Right, this is what really happened. Okay,
not quite.
Whereas, if you take something like what was the film that came out recently, Atomic Blonde, or even some of the newer Star Wars ones, and the media will gush over these things and say, like, this is the role model that should be the role model for all women, that they can do what they want to do and that they can succeed in a world where the odds are against them. And you're
Finally, young girls have a role model, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you're just like, what are you talking about? They take themselves far too seriously. They don't come up with interesting, because it's also lazy, right? If you have a woman who can beat up a 6'5" bloke who's a supposedly special forces trained Russian super soldier or whatever, whereas she's whatever she is, without any kind of universe breaking extra stuff, like, or she's got some kind of cybernetic implant or something. No, it's all just training. It's all just training, especially when they're spindly.
I think it's also worth pointing out the price that the hero/heroine pays. When you mention Bruce Willis, if I remember rightly, he looks as if he's been through a mincing machine at the end of Die Hard. His feet are cut up.
Yeah,
he's got various bandages, burns.
He's burnt from the heating system. He is covered in blood, not just his own, and he's in an absolute state. And of course, that's part of the thing when he gets to the final confrontation with a calm, reposed Alan Rickman in his suit, where he's just he hasn't had to struggle throughout the film. He's just sat in his office and dictated, and occasionally
got irritated. Yes.
Yeah. So that was part of the thing. And again,
but as I say, you've got Bruce Willis. He's been chewed up and spat out. You've got Rocky. I mean, at the end of the Rocky film, I mean, I believe the second part of Rocky, they show the aftermath at the beginning of the film of the fight.
Yeah, they do that in all of them. They all start with
they end up in hospital. So basically, he's that badly smashed to pieces that he's actually in hospital. I mean, I think in Predator also Arnold Schwarzenegger is badly battered about. So in a way, these heroes overcome ridiculous odds. Yes, it's insane, some of the stuff they do, and no one would believe that a human being could do it. But in a way, there is a price extolled of these figures. Whereas I don't remember that ever happening to Keira Knightley in Pirates of the Caribbean, or that kind of new heroine, if you know what I mean.
It's just boring. That's the thing. It's utterly boring.
They're also very humorless, aren't they? So with the 80s action hero, there was always a sort of a silly line or something like that they said, "Hasta la vista, baby," or something like that. That there was always some element of humor that was added once in a while. Whereas with these kind of female Terminators, effectively, it's as you say, it's sold as dead serious. I am the role model for the new generation of female. Rather than make a joke once in a while.
Well, I mean, I don't think that these new films are trying to emulate the 80s style. I mean, I think that's a very deliberate choice. The only series I'm aware of where this worked properly was the Sarah Connor Chronicles. Funny that you should mention Terminator. It doesn't work well in the newer Terminator films, which I've given up watching, but enjoy critical drinkers' reviews of. The Sarah Connor Chronicles has still got Sarah and John in it. They haven't retconned it so that it's a woman who now saves humanity. But they have Summer Glau, who is also in a series called Dollhouse, and she plays the robot from the future. And a part of the charm of it, I suppose, it being in TV series form, gives it a bit more charm. But it gives them a bit more scope to expand on this over time. I mean, but her character is like she comes back. She is a robot, so she is emotionless and fluid and violent. It also helps that she was a world a world championship ballet dancer before she came on, so she was very athletic, and she she kicked. She would just make these decisions which were very, very inhuman. So she promises to help this teacher, and she gets what she wants before the end of it, and so she never comes back to help her, and she gets killed by loan sharks or something like that. And there's no quips or anything like that when she kills anyone, but because the robot develops kind of human hobbies over the course of the series, not just to fit in, and it's a longer arc than Arnold being the Terminator, being a bit more charismatic over the second and third films. But I think that's the only time I'm aware of where it seems to have worked. Whereas now they're all, or they try and go the opposite direction, like where they try to do it with Harley Quinn with these superhero films, where they've got, I can't remember her name, who plays her, but because they're super poppy and super funny, and they're supposed to be slightly insane, but they decide that insane just means acts like a 4-year-old, and so the character never does anything which tells the audience that there's any risk again to her. Like she's playing around with these things, making decisions which are stupid, and there's never any consequences for it. Like they're all implied, and they're like, oh, and Joker beats her in the background, but she's in an abusive relationship. It's like, yeah, but none of that ever comes across, and and that's also not. I mean, it's bizarre. Anyway, they don't know how to write.
I think what you're saying is, they try to add some kind of dramatic depth, but it doesn't really
resonate. No,
there's nothing there because it's never explored to any degree.
No,
so one never has any sort of grim screen time. One is much too concerned with driving forward the plot in various action sequences, and therefore one never has. Like in the film Rocky, you never have the scene where he is hanging around the pet store, talking to the girl he likes in the pet store, and developing, showing a bit of depth to the character of the boxer. Because as far as they're concerned, that's just dead screen time. We're not getting anywhere. So we will simply let it be known that she's being beaten by the Joker, but we won't actually spend any time on that because it's not immediately needed for the plot. So drive the plot. Next action sequence immediately. Thank you very much.
Also, the two things are married together because in order to, let's say, this poppy, childish personality is a direct product of the fact that she is abused, right? You would need to. This is a barrier which she's not allowed to break down when she's feeling comfortable, which is when she's going out and smashing up the town, say. But there's because the film never puts her in a position where she is vulnerable and therefore has the opportunity to grow. Like, she's never beaten down by the circumstances of the film because she's a Mary Sue, and there's no room for character growth, because you only grow as a character, in real life as well as in cinema, when you're put in a position you didn't expect, or that completely took you by surprise, and you're now in very unfamiliar territory and you need to adapt. And you're also a bit vulnerable because you need to open up about something, or you need to bond with another character because you're both in dire straits. There's none of that because they don't provide the space for it. But there you go. I'm going to run through.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to run through a couple of super chats because we're a little bit behind, and I don't want to get too far behind and run out of time. So Scowen has said, 1,209,663 seconds late. I really should accumulate them all from the last time I did so, but frankly, I was so surprised that you actually streamed this week that I was flabbergasted and confounded.
Complete nonsense, because as we already said, everything always gets reset to 0 if we start early.
I don't know what you're talking about. Like, we've never started late over the course of this entire show.
Well, there is that.
So, there you go, Sitsuko, BTFO'd. But thanks for the 100 kroner. Really appreciate it. British Knight says, Frasier and Everybody Loves Raymond are peak sitcom. It's all downhill from there. I never watched Everybody Loves Raymond either. What was that one?
Neither did I, no. I can honestly not say that I've sort of seen snippets, when it was advertised on television and things like that, but it never tempted me. I think, when it comes to sort of peak American sitcom or whatever, I think Seinfeld would more than likely also fit in there. I think that was also fairly special.
Wasn't Seinfeld the original sitcom? I don't know.
Well, I think a lot of people sort of say Seinfeld became the sitcom that everybody else began to emulate. And therefore, a lot of what was special about Seinfeld disappeared because everybody understands that to just be the format of the sitcom these days. It's a bit like, what happened to Citizen Kane, that we're always told how Citizen Kane is one of the greatest films ever made. But when you watch it these days, you just go, okay, yeah, it's just a film. I don't really understand. Except it's only once it's explained to you that a lot of the techniques that were actually used in that film that then got used in all films afterwards.
Yeah.
At the time when it was used for the first time in those films, all these various different ways of shooting with a camera and whatever. At the time, it was sensational. People were just sitting there, with open mouths, going, "I didn't know this was possible." But then, of course, that sort of novelty gets eroded by time because everybody adapts it, and then looking back, you're not really interested anymore. Which was the first film ever to do it?
Have you seen Tron?
I've seen Tron. Yes.
Yeah. My dad, I watched that, and I said, I really enjoyed the film. Although for me it was less about nostalgia, obviously, and more about just the kind of it's a kind of faux nostalgia for the era. Just interesting to look at from my perspective. But my dad said to me, and he just said to me flatly after I watched it, and I said, I really enjoyed that, and he said, but you don't understand, and you can never understand what it was like to watch this when it first came out.
It was like an alien from outer space, had landed and had plonked down a movie from a different planet and gone, there you go, watch this.
The CGI just hadn't been really a thing up until that point. The idea of a machine transposing you and putting you into a digital world was, and it having full 3D graphics of them flying around in these great computer ships on computer lines, not to mention the what do you call it? The laser bikes, where they have the beams.
Yeah, I mean that's the sort of iconic moment, isn't it? Those bikes they're having a duel on. Yeah,
and he's just going. You just can't understand like what that meant to a kid. When you watched that, it was just unbelievable. And I wonder actually what kind of new film techniques and so on there are that will stand the test of time from the current era that have done something different, sort of post-millennium.
Yeah, it's interesting because that people really had that, experience of seeing something just utterly new. Everything else has been more of an evolution rather than a revolution.
I don't know. I mean, I saw... There was some stuff in there where you wonder about the story. So you want the story to stand out and to be delivered in an effective way. But there's no... Yeah, Colin P. Smith saying in the chat, the Christopher Reeve Superman, you will believe a man can fly. I'm looking at it and I'm going, there are some kind of niche films which stand out, but none which have had like the cultural impact either that these films from the past have had as well that have done it. There's the general development of CGI and spectacle and that sort of thing, but I look at that as well and I go, but most people are now at the point where CGI is expected and overused as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
there are films as well which I thought were very well done, where it's a novelty to have little to no CGI.
CGI now has replaced the explosion. There was a sort of trope in a lot of Hollywood films that once you can't up the ante anymore in the film. So basically, you start with one boss, then you get the next bigger boss, and you end up with the big boss, and then he gets defeated. But how do you reach the climax of the movie? Well, simple. You blow up the set.
Yeah.
And a great many films ended on the explosion with, the hero preferably clutching the heroine in his arms, pretty much coming slightly singed out of the flames of the explosion.
But he never looks back at it. He never looks back at it.
Times.
Yes.
And, now what has happened is CGI has simply replaced that. So when you don't know what else to do, just up it in CGI. Just put in yet more monsters or something like that.
Well,
but yeah, I think I know I have long since got tired of it. But I think more than likely it is reaching saturation point with a great deal of the audience these days, I believe.
People are going to hate me for this opinion, but sort of, Michael Bay is the peak of what you're describing there. The trope of more explosions. It's like you're not coming up with ideas, Michael. You're coming up with special effects. That's the sort of the idea. But so he did Transformers, which is much maligned. I really enjoyed the first film of those. But of course, it then that spawned like its entire genre. Like they got progressively worse from there. Not to mention all of the side things. And of course, because it was a children's toy franchise which had been gritted up a little bit and made palatable for a modern audience and made spectacular, they did the same. They started doing the same thing. I think there was even a film which starred Rihanna, which was based on Hasbro's Battleship. Right, Battleship.
I think I've seen that one. Yes,
and it wasn't a terrible film. I mean, it wasn't groundbreaking or anything, but it was an enjoyable, spectacular thing.
It was a perfectly decent popcorn film. It wasn't anything special, but it wasn't terrible either.
It'll be forgotten, and in most parts it has been forgotten. But people will still remember that Transformers and Michael Bay were, a thing in that side of things for a brief moment before superhero films took over the entire thing. I mean, this is definitely going to be seen as the era of the superhero franchise.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt.
The what was I going to say? Sorry, I got caught up there with Rihanna, but with battleships. But I'm quite looking forward, for instance, to Godzilla versus King Kong, because I know the story will be utter dross. But I know that I'm going to see the spectacle of a big monkey fighting a big lizard. It's not going to break any boundaries. It's going to be as much CGI as they can pack in there. But that's what I'm going to see. But in terms of films which utterly change the landscape of film, I don't really see what could come. And I appreciate that might be a little bit facetious. Who can predict? Before Citizen Kane, who could predict Citizen Kane? But I expect that. I mean, we've already seen somewhat of a trend to it with historical films, where they've obviously grown somewhat in popularity. Biopics are obviously massive. Leonardo DiCaprio brought back the biopic, I would say, because he just seemed to play every American inventor in history at one point. Or con artist, I should say. But the kind of smaller scale stuff where it's more delicately put, I think, will be there. There'll always be the bombastic superhero films. Although it remains to be seen how successful.
I think when it comes to the technology, we've more than likely reached a plateau. That doesn't mean that it won't sort of in future go upwards again. It just means, I think, for now they've reached where they can go with what they had with this new CGI toy.
Well, I disagree slightly. They're in the uncanny valley now, so they can do buildings and that sort of thing, and the next great step up is faces and people. So there's already in the big franchises with a lot of money to splurge on this sort of thing. In one of the connecting Rogue One, Star Wars Rogue One, they had a CGI Princess Leia, and in the in Justice League, DC's Justice League or something like that, they had Henry Cavill, who was playing Superman in that, because he was doing another film and they had to bring him back for reshoots. He had a mustache from that film, so they've CGI'd his face, and it's uncanny valley territory at the moment. You can tell it's not a real person.
Yeah, I think they've also youthified a few actors, haven't they?
Yes, digital youthing is now a thing.
Yeah, but I think that's where we're sort of in deep fake territory, which no doubt, yes, that there is sort of potential. But when it comes to the actual, adding to spectacle, I think they've pretty much, they will further refine CGI and whatever, I mean, no doubt. But as a tool, I don't really think they can make that much more of it.
Well, it's really annoying. You're right. The thing that I've noticed is because they still try and push the spectacle, but now it's moving into TV because it becomes ever more affordable. So films recognise they're kind of hitting the roof on spectacle, but now TV series, almost every TV series is like either post-apocalyptic or there was some like great catastrophe they're trying to avert, and there's loads of special effects involved with that, and it just completely puts me off because there's no where's the kind of the gap between period drama and real drama, and I mean I don't want to watch just crime.
We're still sort of in this part, particularly with cinema, of trying to be global and thus trying to have global appeal. I think with television, they're not necessarily always trying to go for a global audience. I think they're much more willing to just cater to a Western audience, which is, of course, what cinema previously did. But cinema is so terribly, terribly scared of losing its global number one position if it only supplies Western markets. The problem is, if you want to supply a global market, you need something that is intelligible to everybody.
I blame you.
And therefore you end up with, these cartoon characters punching each other.
I blame you.
No, go ahead.
I blame you. And do you know why?
Go ahead. I want to know how I am responsible for the demise of Western cinema.
I am going to shamelessly steal from Mirror J in the comments here, who says, Britisher was the original deep fake. How do you think he stays 20 years old?
Well, you see, this is not a deep fake.
How dare you generate this technology, Britisher?
It's also not technology. It's we've all seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And,
yes, only recently, but yes.
Well, you see, there you go. Now you know what technology I utilised.
The Last Crusade.
Oh, for goodness sake, the Holy Grail.
Yes, that was the one. Yes, but this also explains why nobody ever sees you, because you're not allowed to leave the room.
Precisely. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I had the Last Crusade, and I was thinking of obviously the best Indiana Jones film, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and how crap it was.
Oh, good God.
It was just awful.
It's just terrible, absolutely terrible. And you just think, how is it possible that the same people were involved and didn't they know their own character?
They have Shia LaBeouf in there is really annoying, and then aliens. Mm-hmm. And what is it? South Park, I think, did the most biting critique, where the kids go and with the help of other people who've seen the film, basically get George Lucas and Steven Spielberg arrested for raping Indiana Jones. It's one of the most depressing
It's just terrible. It really is. Again, it is soulless, and it's gone down the CGI route too far, and people are running around on green screens too much, more than likely, and therefore not interacting with each other properly. But yes, you just look at it and you just go, how is it possible that this was made by people who were involved with the other episodes? But yes, I mean, we've seen how these franchises can go terribly bad. I think what it shows is how in the past, with some franchises like, Back to the Future or whatever, how a great deal more care seemed to be taken. And perhaps, as we've seen some franchises go bad, rather than just criticize those which went wrong, we might actually want to credit those which actually managed to maintain it. Because it suddenly becomes clear that it's more than likely not as easy, because, as easy as we thought, given that, previous franchises seem to be able to pull off this trick. Because it seems quite clear that, yes, you can really mump it up. And things like, the Crystal Skull, that, Indiana Jones is a classical example of that. And that's before you even start mentioning Star Wars. But no, I love my movies, but I find myself increasingly sort of living in the past, looking at past movies. And it's not even, how you get these people who always swear that music was brilliant in such and such an era, and it always happens to be when they were 16. And in reality, it's just that they're associating their, that music with their own youth, and that's why they like it.
Yeah,
I just don't find that to be the case with my liking for films. It's not just what happened to be around when I was young and growing up and whatever. It's, I love some sort of really old movies that long predate me and whatever. Because, yes, I think it really is the art form of the 20th century in particular.
Well,
bringing together all aspects. But mainly, they were just very artful storytellers back then, and that just seems to really have gone out the window. And when you mention that these days, then people just shout you down on social media and tell you that, oh, well, you just want, art movies and whatever. And the thing is, no, I find art movies terribly dreary. But, conventional, mainstream entertainment that was old movies is way superior to what we're churning out now.
I mean, I tend to enjoy films, but every film now that is even marginally successful has to be franchised. And so I think you end up with a lot of resources going into things. I mean, take one of the films I really like, John Wick. I really like John Wick. Just a good film all round. Great action, decent world building, and that sort of thing. But they made 2 more films of that.
Yeah.
2 more films, which didn't need to be made. Flatly, they didn't need to be made. I mean, it was clear from the ending of the first one they were going to make at least a second one. They should have ended it with a second one. They didn't need a third one, and the third one was... Like, where something could be over-explained, and the mystery was more compelling than the... So, that... I just feel like when you've got all these resources going into these enormous projects like that, it becomes very difficult. It's also suffering a little bit from, the sequel issue, where usually they're never quite as good as the first film. But you now have this idea that you need to build a universe. You need... there's this constant push for enormous universes tying together lots of different films, and even if your film appears to be independent at the beginning, it needs to connect out to some other film by some bizarre referencing, and they exist in the same quote-unquote universe. And I just I think it takes away from telling interesting, unique stories, And then you get the films which I find, are actually quite compelling, which have done very well. Films like 1917 and Dunkirk and that sort of thing. And
when
they're just not.
Sorry, go ahead.
And they're just not quite. They, whilst they're good, so they're only good in a particular context or with a particular knowledge, and it feels like because they were targeted, that's why I enjoyed them as well. In the same way that they didn't make as much money, and therefore there's less put into it because people don't. People from China, for instance, who are the largest market in the world for film at the moment, don't want to watch a film about some English rescue effort that took place on a beach in Normandy.
But funnily enough, we will watch The Seven Samurai. What I would ask is, everybody in the audience to just simply ask themselves a simple question. When was the last time you watched a film that moved you? Where you really felt very strong emotions? Because films are capable of doing that. Really good films can really, really pull on your heartstrings. But when's the last time? When's the last time you've actually seen something like that? When's the last time you have seen a story that blew your mind? I mean, the last time I would say I've seen a film like that was when Captain Swiss recommended I watch the South Korean film Old Boy.
Oh yes, good film.
And that one, I felt that's fantastic. But that's what I want from a film. And I would hazard a guess there's not a single special effect in it. And it's not a film that has somehow won some art prize or the Palme d'Or or some pretentious garbage. It is a film that is clearly meant entirely to entertain. It's clearly meant for the mainstream. But that is in a way what films were. Before the whole thing just became overrun by these massive productions. And it isn't as if the past didn't know massive productions. I mean, didn't Cleopatra, I think, break 3 studios or something like that? Some of these really massive productions in the past, Ben-Hur and Spartacus and Gandhi and you name it, they were vast productions because back then if you wanted 10,000 people in a crowd, you couldn't CGI them. You needed 10,000 extras. It's not as if in the past we haven't done big productions, but we didn't exclusively do big productions. And at the same time, one was telling stories to an audience that understood them. Whereas, as you say, these days, if you try and tell the story of 1917, of the fighting in the trenches of the First World War, to the Chinese, many of whom are first or second generation off the rice paddies, it means nothing to them. They have no context to it. So why should they be interested? Somewhere something has got lost. And I think it's almost as if, to a certain extent, the West is abandoning its own foremost art form, which is a tragedy as far as I'm concerned.
To answer your question, three films come to mind. Galaxy Quest.
Okay, yes,
of all
it's
things.
A good film. I like it.
And for all its silliness, I thought that they struck a perfect balance between the silliness and the serious stuff, like the torture of the captain and when they suddenly realise that they're in way over their head.
Yes, and
of course
there is that other layer where you know that in a way this is a commentary on Star Trek.
And then of course when Alan Rickman's character, Dr. Lazarus, who is also playing an actor.
I played King Lear,
yes,
and now this.
But when he his protege effectively dies, and he has to avenge him. And that's just a moment where, in all of this, they're killing all of the people on board. They're suffocating them to death. They're having to fight through to get them, and then in the act of that rescue, he dies. And you're just like, yeah.
What's the thing he says? By Gravthar's hammer or something like that, isn't it? I will avenge you.
By Grapthar's hammer, you will be avenged.
Yes. Grapthar's hammer. There you go.
But so that comes to mind. Lord of the Rings, just because that's an emotional roller coaster in of itself. And what was the film I watched recently, which also had that kind of vibe? I can't remember off the top of my head now. I've lost it in reminiscing about Grapthar's hammer.
I've never connected much with Lord of the Rings.
I can tell.
It never got through to me. When you say you felt it was a sort of an emotional roller coaster ride, me it left fairly cold all the way through. I never really had any strong emotions with that film.
Whereas I have only ever watched the extended editions and consider them all to be masterpieces. Yeah, it's a very different experience.
I think when it comes to the visual spectacle, I take my hat off to Lord of the Rings. It's a fantastic feast for the eyes. When it comes to the stories, I think it suffers from this problem that several films have had over the ages. The two most recent ones I can think of were Alexander and Troy.
Okay.
Some stories defy being fit into a film, and it doesn't matter how long you make the film. The stories are too big. You just can't crush them down. You can't condense them into fitting into something like that. So
I think what you're saying is true, but I don't think it could be applied to Lord of the Rings, especially not the first film, where there is not a second of wasted space. I would say what I thought you were going to bring up as a potential issue was the fact that there are so many stories going on concurrently, and we're jumping around quite a lot between them. And it can feel quite disjointed, particularly in the second film.
Good point. Yes.
Where it's the only weak point really for me of the trilogy is that the time spent with Gollum, Sam, and Frodo at the beginning of the second film in the extended cut is too long. But
I've never seen the extended cut, but I must say I also got a bit sick of Gollum.
So that Gollum is the weakest part of it for me. However, it's so important to Frodo's character development, especially towards right near the end, and also the subversion of the hero's journey, where it turns out that Sam is the hero all along, really, because he never wavers and so on. He's the perfect ally. Anyway, all that aside, so Lord of the Rings touches me certainly. But yes, we must get on back to the super chats because we're running out of time, and I do want to get through these, and obviously I want to give them the due time that they deserve. Mad Beast Yeti says, if you want a laugh and are looking for the big Canadian sitcoms, check out Corner Gas and Letterkenny.
The big Canadian sitcoms. So go on, they're not so obvious. Off the top of your head, name 3 Canadian sitcoms.
I don't know, Friends.
These this obviously being the big Canadian sitcom.
Fargo.
I would really struggle. I would struggle to think of a Canadian sitcom. So thanks for that suggestion.
Yes, thanks, Matt.
I mean, I guess they need a sense of humour with the Prime Minister of the kind they've got.
No idea. Yes, the only I've watched several Canadian things, but Fargo is the only one which sticks out to me. But there we go. Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker says, amazing how the president with the most votes in history has the lowest 100-day poll in history as well. really gets my election suspecting. A bit of a political take in here now.
The lowest 100-day poll.
Because it was all been President Biden 100-day poll. I did see something on this earlier. Yeah, so NBC is saying, at 100 days, Biden's approval remains strong. Can the honeymoon last? Most Americans approve of President Joe Biden's first 100 days, from CNN. Slightly more than half of Americans say that he did a good job. No, I don't want to disable my ad blocker. Let's go to a different thing. Whereas,
so he's over 50%, effectively.
ABC says low-end approval, but strong marks on this. The third lowest for any president at 100 days. But again, interesting, isn't it, to see the optics on this, where they just say approval remains strong, despite it being.
I'm a bit confused. I mean, given that I'm not looking at it here, you just said over half, so that's over 50%.
52%, yes, but that's very low for a. In fact, let me go to.
Is it?
Let me go.
I mean, did Trump ever go over 50%?
I'm just about to share it with you. This is the and I'll put it on the Fake Accents News Viewer as well, just so that we can all see the same thing. Pop that on there. Yeah. So here we are. It says, intense partisanship is holding Joe Biden to a tepid job approval rating, the third lowest for any president at 100 days since Harry Truman. All told, 52% approve of his work in office, lower than any president since 1945, save Gerald Ford in 74 and Donald Trump at 42. The average is 66% for the previous.
Okay, so he's at what? He's at 50 what percent?
52.
52. As compared to the one person he's supposed to have beaten, who was at 42.
Yes.
Fair point?
No, because I don't trust polls. These,
well, yes, but you brought this up in the context. It was brought up under the context of, oh, it's so low, but he's supposed to be the most popular in history.
That is also the point. Like, percentage-wise, not just in flat votes, he's supposed to be the most popular president in US history. And he's got barely half the population on side.
Well, yes, but, I mean, he had barely half the population in winning the election, didn't he?
Yes, but his actions are supposed to endear him. If you look at even George Bush had higher ratings than he did. Obama, who wasn't as popular as he was when he came in, had nearly 70% approval, and he was his vice president at the time.
Not sure. I think Obama was more popular.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Obama was 69%.
In terms of what I mean, in terms of percentage of the vote, Obama surely won by a greater margin than Biden did his election. People are sort of talking of the raw numbers and saying, Biden got the greatest ever. Well, yes, but Trump got the second greatest ever.
365. Biden's winning margin was what was his victory margin? It was how many seats did he win? He got 290 in the end, or 300 and something, didn't he? Let's see.
I just think Obama won.
He passed Obama's popular vote total.
Oh yes, I know. But what I mean is, so did Trump.
Yes, of course.
It was just because vast amounts of people voted. But when it comes to actually percentage terms, I would suggest that Obama more than likely won by a higher percentage than
Obama got 365 electoral votes, and Biden got 306. There you go.
So, as I say, when it comes to these percentages, if you say that after the first 100 days Obama was higher than Biden, well, Obama started out higher than Biden. It's just that in terms of raw figures, if you just look at the numbers, Biden got more than anybody else. But the person who came in second in that election also got more than anybody else ever. It was perhaps the most polarized election, for yonks, where a huge amount of people, I think, turned out simply because they despised the other candidate. And I think it turns out that hatred is a greater motivator than love of a politician.
Apparently, they only polled 22% of Republicans for this particular poll. So the one that gives him majority support is 78% Democrat.
Well, I have no idea. I would look at the figures, and if the figures say it's roughly in keeping with his election victory, fine. If at the same time they've been, fiddling whom they're actually asking, no comment, because you always wonder, is that the people who are actually polling or the people who are reporting on the supposed crooked polling who are crooked?
Fair.
It becomes much of a muchness in the end.
To bring it all to a kind of concise end to Anna Quinn Cringe-Walker's message, I will say that, certainly raises some questions. It's not that there aren't answers, but certainly questions have been raised. And I find it suspicious, and British is obviously less partisan than I am. So there you go.
Well, like this, my question is regarding what the platforms were doing, not regarding what Venezuelan counting machine companies, blah, 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 blah. That, as far as I'm concerned, that's just a non-starter. But I think if you look into what Professor Epstein told Congress, you may recall that when he was being when he was being questioned by Ted Cruz, and I think he's been back since, hasn't he? And he was suggesting vast figures could be shifted. And I recall after the last election, he even said that at what they had set up, he and his team had set up some accounts in order to be able to monitor things. So they had given data that they knew would lead the platforms to conclude that they were either Republican or Democrat supporters and whatever. And, for example, Facebook put out an alert to all their Democrat accounts urging them to go vote, but none to the Republicans. And then they raised that, and then after that Facebook stopped doing that. And they were saying, look, you have no idea how much of this stuff can be shifted. So subliminal messaging, insofar that search terms that provide you with certain results, it can subliminally shift your perception. So we all know, if you entered Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, you got to articles, heaping praise on the candidates. If you entered Donald Trump, you would get articles that were deeply critical, questioning his competency, and so on. And I think if you want to know what achieved this sort of, Biden miracle, that's where you look. That I think something happened that had hitherto never happened in any elections. And people concluded, well, it must be that the vote count, that it was fiddled, and look, there are some boxes here on a video, and you just go, no, I'm sorry, an election that size, you'll always find some boxes on a video. It doesn't show that there's some sort of systemic wrongdoing. But
they literally...
you want to find something that really could have shifted millions and millions of votes. Look to these social media platforms and their ability to shape the perception of tens of millions of American voters. And that's where, as far as I'm concerned, the real worry lies. Because... do you remember those videos from that Google town hall meeting after Trump won? And you had all these sort of middle management people of Google complaining about how outraged they were that this is a quote, that this had happened on their watch. And it was quite clear at that moment that there was something there that Google were outraged that this could have happened while they were in charge of how people perceived things.
Yes.
And I'm quite convinced that after that they sat down and said, okay, let's make sure this never happens again.
They did. I mean, they're one of their directors got caught on video saying exactly that, yes. Yeah.
And basically... what we saw with the Trump victory was that this wasn't the case yet. So we had seen how sort of the infancy of internet in politics came about. So Obama, for example, he was the one that started fundraising. So sort of micro donations. And he managed with that to outraise any other political candidate. That's why he won. I mean, his organization was much more switched on to the internet, and he smashed Hillary Clinton's machine and everything simply because he had that much more money. Then came Trump, and Trump realized that he could sideline the media and talk to the electorate directly through Twitter, which is what got him in. But now this time round, it was once again, as far as I'm concerned, the internet. But this time round, it was the internet giants who... recently I saw this interesting documentary on Amazon, and it was called The Men Who Built America. And you've got these giant, these titans of industry, Rockefeller, Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and there's various sort of giants of industry in America who became richer than Bill Gates and these people are together. I mean, if you look at Rockefeller's equivalent wealth, he's bigger than Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook combined. It's ridiculous how wealthy that man was, but when they saw threats arising to their industrial monopolies, they simply got together and got themselves a president elected. Now, they tried to sideline Teddy Roosevelt by making him VP, thinking they would basically be digging his political grave. What they couldn't know was that their chosen president, who effectively was their puppet, that he would die, leaving it to Teddy Roosevelt to take over. But it shows that there is, in a way, a precedent for these industrial giants getting together and saying, okay, who do we want as president? And I think when it comes to these platforms, who have subsumed the entire media, because you get to see what media they let you see, what media they point you to. It's their search engines that find a news article for you, or don't find it, as the case may be. So these companies have suddenly become the gatekeeper to the media in a way that has never been the case before. And they have now, this time round, flexed their muscles. And it's the first time. And therefore, we're kind of taken aback and going, oh, well, something really strange happened. Well, yes, it did. And it's never happened before. Because this time round, Google were determined that one side would win. And that's how I explain that victory. It's, as far as I'm concerned, listen to Professor Epstein. Listen to the figures. I mean, he is saying, up to 15 million votes could be shifted and things like that. Once you hear figures like that, I mean, it's eye-watering. And yeah, that's where you have to start asking yourself what one wants to do about these monstrous companies.
Indeed. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into what we might do about those monstrous companies today, so I'm going to guide us back to the world of film. EC90 says, talking about film remakes, don't think I have been as angry till I saw the teaser trailer for the West Side Story remake today. A corporate remake of arguably the greatest American musical ever, F. I didn't even know they were remaking.
Neither did I, but so many of these remakes these days sink like a stone. I mean, were you aware of the fact they'd remade Ben-Hur?
No.
That they'd remade Conan?
Yes, I remember they remade Conan, but only because I can still picture the poster and myself laughing at it and going, I'm not going to see that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, as I say, these things just, they come up with these ideas. Oh, let's remake this, and you just go, why? So, I wouldn't be too worried that the new version of West Side Story would suddenly supplant the old one. How on earth you want to make a musical on gangs today?
Yeah.
Given how our perception of gangs has changed somewhat, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do camp bloods snipping their fingers to the rhythm of music in today's tattooed gang culture. It's yeah.
I mean, it's very we're slightly different. Not to mention that our gang culture is also smaller than it was before. I mean, it's America, so maybe I'm missing a different context here.
But generally always been seen that these are the campest gang members of all times.
Yes.
But at least they were operating from a position of, gangs not being quite as menacing as antisocial as it might be considered today.
No. I mean, a very peaceful knife fights in these gang films nowadays. Anyway,
yes.
In fact, those are
but
two stories.
I'm also not sure whether it's the greatest American musical.
Well, there are many great American musicals, but it's clearly EC90's favourite, so we'll give him that. Yes, in fact, those are two stories we should probably have covered this evening, which is the police officer who shot the girl who was going to stab another girl after stabbing another girl.
Which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I mean, Ash Sarkar saying, how is it that a supposedly highly trained police officer couldn't disarm a girl just as any teacher does every day?
Did he see the size of that monster as well as everything else? Like, she's not exactly a slight little thing to tackle.
Yes, yeah, indeed.
Right.
But aside from the fact, you get a sense of how far away he is from her. And that she is a fraction of a second. The blade is effectively already travelling towards the victim.
Yes, when he says, whether it is like drop it or whatever, her arm is already back and ready to push forward in the stabbing motion. And as she goes to do that, he shoots her. The dude is a hero who saved a life from a vicious murderer.
As I said in the week that was, she was about to gut the other girl like a fish.
Yeah. There would have been not just one stab wound; it would have been rapid.
The irony about the whole thing is, here's a white police officer who saved the life of a black girl, but that is not the way in which it's being presented. Because suddenly, the skin color of the victim, of the supposed victim, the targeted victim, that skin color is suddenly irrelevant.
Yeah.
But the skin color of the about to be perpetrator, that is all important. And I don't know if you heard that other story of the Black Lives Matter march for the latest victim of a police shooting.
Oh.
That then turned out not to be a black guy, so they all went home.
Amazing.
There was a carjacking. So some guy had, hijacked a car, and police were after him. He was shooting at police. He leapt out of the car while it was still moving, although it had slowed down, and then ran onto the freeway or highway or whatever they call it over there, and pointed the gun at another car in order to get control of that. And they shot him, and immediately Black Lives Matter protest formed, and they took the knee and they started a protest march. But then it emerged that this guy was actually white, so they all got back up again and walked home.
There was an amazing Sky News segment where Sky were race baiting with this American commentator, black commentator, and they said, this is horrific, that this has happened, and he was like, no, and then he literally gave them the 1352 line, and then went on and basically said twice as many white people are killed in altercations with the police, despite being less than the percentage of violent crime that black people commit. So actually, no, it's nowhere near as bad as you think. And it was just like, there's a difference between wanting police accountability and racializing everything, and it was just such a glorious, like, basically fuck off moment that I doubt they'll invite him back. But that was great.
But yes, the problem is that these moments are far, far too rare. That this moment of common sense being spoken, and it being pointed out that everything is now being seen through the prism of oppression. So, anything regarding females, it's the patriarchy, and we need more women. Well, insert calls here.
It's just the extrapolation and expansion of the kind of communist class struggle dynamic applied to different contexts, right? So it gets applied to gender dynamics, and then it gets applied to racial dynamics, even where it's not there. It's just stoking division where none should exist.
Well, you see, that's where I do differ from you quite starkly. Okay. I don't believe this is cultural Marxism at all. I really don't think it's it goes back to communism and Marxism. I think this is the same tactic. This is an entirely different beast. And I think that is one of the reasons why the right is having trouble tackling it, because I think a lot of it is being misidentified as something that it isn't, and I think that perhaps explains why one is having such trouble with it. The first reason, the foremost reason, I think, is because it's so difficult to argue against something that is constantly arguing for nothing more than fairness and justice. So I think everybody is wrong-footed by that. But yes, I think it some of it also comes from the fact that one is really struggling, as in what are the origins of this thing, and I don't think it's the values of Marxism or communism transposed into these things. I really think it's its own beastie. If anything, it's more closely related to something like the abolitionist movement and early feminism and whatever, than it is to sort of that sort of dichotomy of capitalism and communism.
I suppose you're assuming that I don't ascribe similar ideas and ideals to both of those groups, but Yeah, there you go. We'll have to move on because we're now overtime. It's going to be a bumper episode this evening. But Mr. Will Guitar says, Britisher must now concede that Avon from Blake 7, it really is the most British thing ever, and the command of cutting insults is second to none.
I need to explain. Mr. Will Guitar sent me a clip from Blake 7. I've never really watched Blake 7 in any great length, but I know Rubber, I think, is a fan, and I think Rubber has mentioned this character before. And there is sort of an exchange, and all of it is very, very clipped and very, very British. But yes, there is there is this Avon or whatever he's called, and it is more than likely one of the most British things ever put on screen. I will grant you that, Mr. Will Guitar. And it's so strange to see something that British set in futuristic space. But yes, I advised him to basically send that to Rubber, because I think Rubber would be in ecstasy at the sight of that.
Hollow 1916 said, I got an ebook reader recently. I've been pirating books, textbooks, novels, spicy PDFs and Japanese manga like mad onto an external hard drive now. You? ? Well, aside from you admitting to committing a crime via Super Chat, I haven't been copying or pirating books, textbooks, novels, spicy PDFs or Japanese manga onto external hard drives. How about you, Britisher? Have you been doing any of that?
No, I can't really say, for one, that I'm a particular big fan of Japanese manga and so on.
Oh, don't lie,
I've never quite understood the fascination. I have tried to get one or two artists to produce some British art, which one might have been able to use for merch, which was of that ilk.
In an anime style.
Yes, but that was very much because it would annoy all the right people.
I'm just trying to imagine that now. Well, if Mira J is still around, perhaps she could draw something for us.
There are one or two sort of really good artists who all have commissions closed on their Twitter, on their Twitter profile, that I have been trying to convince. That they're how shall we say? They're well known for drawing well-endowed ladies. Let's put it like that.
And that's the thing which draws you, because you'll obviously want well-endowed ladies in the image with you. I understand.
Very much so. Yes.
In the usual.
Yes, I think if it would be drawn in that manner, and it would be of the quality of someone like a Mr. Devil H or whatever he called himself. Yes, it would be. I would enjoy the reaction in just the same way as I at times enjoy the reaction on social media to my avatar, which seems to send some people apoplectic. How shall we say? I am of that ilk. I am mischievous in that regard. I can't help myself.
Fair enough. British Knight says, martial arts in cinema effectively follows beats, much like dancing. It's choreographed, yeah. It looks good, but martial arts are not dances. They're more like toolkits. I think one of the things with a lot of martial arts that people forget is there are a lot of throws, and it's very dirty, typically, which is, when everyone's dancing around one another on the screen, is a little bit, I know everybody likes the kind of a flashy fight scene between two martial arts experts, but if you've ever seen such things, you wouldn't even really see the blows connecting until they got proper. It's a strange one.
Well, I blame Jackie Chan, is all I can say. Mind you, at least with him it was funny. He did a lot of really highly choreographed fight scenes.
But Jackie Chan also kind of recognised that he wasn't being totally serious.
Yes, of course. Precisely. It was fun. It was, there would be humorous elements built into those sequences. And that said, I mean, at least as far as stunt work is concerned, I mean, he was remarkable. Some of the things he actually did for real.
Yeah.
So one has to take one's hat off to the man. It's quite exceptional what he did. But when it came to the fight sequences, his stuff, I think, before the West began to embrace this sort of thing, he had already made it a sort of comedic trope.
Yes.
So he wasn't just one, he seemed to have been about half a dozen steps ahead of them. It's almost as if he was making fun of what was to come.
Here we go. Anakin Cringewalker says, "What do you mean, Britisher, that the Antifa 1000 gendered commie generation lacks a concept of reality? How very dare you? Hashtag Rudisher, hashtag cancel Britisher." I have no idea what this is in reference to.
I think it's
an hour
when
ago.
I said that maybe the millennial generation and whatever sort of suspends its disbelief with these, fighting super women, whereas other generations look at it and just go, "I'm sorry, but this makes no sense whatsoever." So with the likes of me, once Keira Knightley starts fighting these muscle mounds, suspension of disbelief breaks. Whereas I think there is a large segment, at least, within sort of millennials and Gen Zs, where to them suspension of disbelief still holds in those circumstances.
Oh,
and I think that's what he's. I think that's what he's referring to when he says, "Are you saying that they don't have a sense of reality?"
I don't know. I don't know that they'd even define it as suspension of disbelief. I mean, this kind of societal self-harm is why female solo travelers get murdered in Iran. It's just too much suspension of disbelief.
But then again, in Iran, there is news from Iran. I don't know if you heard that.
God.
What's she called? This Sahari Ratcliffe woman who was arrested some years ago and she was held for spying and whatever.
They've given her another year, haven't they?
But they've now given her yet another year.
In prison.
So, now it's for propaganda or something. So it really does seem that one is just making up accusations and then finding her guilty. So it's fairly obvious that this woman is actually being held as a hostage by Iran.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really surprise you, because it's not as if Iran hasn't had a history of hostage taking as a nation.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, one can't help but feel that perhaps the word scumbags is appropriate here.
Mr. Will Guitar says, "Movies are one thing, sirs, but I did find it very distasteful when Ronda Rousey badly assaulted her boyfriend at the time, and this was considered empowerment." Yes, kind of.
What am I missing here? I'm unfamiliar with what is being referenced.
Ronda Rousey, female MMA fighter.
Okay.
And she abused her boyfriend, assaulted him, and this was considered an empowerment of women.
Oh, of course. Why wouldn't it be? Double standards, very much.
Yeah. I mean, but it's another thing where they're just, when they're trying to, they don't look at the differences between men and women and say this is how we can make women flourish. They look at the differences between men and women and say men have got this thing that we don't. Let's say,
look, it's
we want it, and therefore
it's really
turn women into men.
It's really as simple as this, folks. I'm sorry, but we already had it all sorted in the 90s. The sexism thing, the race thing, we had everything sorted. I'm sorry, it was done. But something being done doesn't sell books, and it doesn't get you on the BBC as a pundit and so on, and it doesn't buy Al Sharpton a new suit. So one has just basically not just perpetuated a problem that doesn't exist, one has actually instilled into society the view that everything is worse than ever before. And it's a tragedy. Because I'm sorry, it was done. I mean, you must have seen that, surely, on Twitter, when somebody I think, referred to, was it Craig Charles, saying that in the 90s, half the cast of Red Dwarf was actually diverse, in inverted commas.
And they made the deliberate choice to never mention it. Yes.
Yes, it was not a deliberate choice, and nobody ever mentioned it. And surely that indicated to everyone that it was done. This was no longer an issue. But, I mean, yes, here we are 30 years later, and it's now suddenly a big issue.
Well, the worst... I can't remember who said it, and I'm butchering the quotation, but the worst thing that you can do is lose your enemy. Once you've solved the majority of the big problems plaguing society, or at least have them on track enough that you can move on from them and let them sort of resolve themselves until they, or if when they flare up again. What do? You need an enemy. You need something to rally against, to rally around, because we destroyed what we needed to rally, what we were rallying around. Which is partially the British identity, partially it was the family, and then it was also the Christianity aspect. These things have all been eroded over time. So what do? We focus more and more on the enemies, and now the enemy has become society itself, and we don't know what to do with it.
Put it like this: if you take the entire army of diversity officers, I mean, always consider every single council has a diversity officer.
Yeah.
Every major company has got a diversity officer and whatever. So these are several legions worth. Every Roman legion, about 5,000 men. So in Britain alone, we have got several legions worth of diversity officers. When will any of them ever basically argue themselves out of a job by saying, no,
they're
all done, there's no more need for us?
Here's the thing with them. They're not consultants. They're not done with the company and then they move on. They are in the company, that is their job, they expect to be there forever.
As long as there is a problem, there is a need for them. So, when would they ever say, no, everything's perfectly hunky-dory in this company, everything is totally ship-shape, there are no problems, there is perfect harmony among the staff, because they know that they're no longer needed if that's the case. So they need to constantly keep digging for trouble. And it's ridiculous. Aside from the fact that for someone like myself, who grew up during the Cold War, and I remember being taught at school that, in the East, they've got all these political officers everywhere. What do you think I see diversity officers as being? It's a different ideology, and but it's the same thing. Here are political enforcers that we have somehow placed upon ourselves, which is really bizarre. But yeah, it may be, as you say, there's nothing worse than losing your enemy. And as long as the West identified itself as the opposite of the Eastern Bloc, and we saw what wrongs the Eastern Bloc was doing, and we therefore contrasted ourselves from that and said, that we will never do, we shall stay away from that. The moment that went, we no longer had the need to not commit certain sort of capital societal offences, and we started turning on ourselves. Who knows? Maybe that's it. Maybe therefore Cold War with China can't come soon enough. How we are not yet in a Cold War with China, I will never understand, but, well, there you go.
Right.
Have I killed the conversation again? Come on,
bit.
Super Chats, is there anything more?
2 Super Chats remain. Gaius Natuus Caesar says, well, you see, the Romans were extremely groundbreaking with their techniques of executing criminals during their stage plays. Yeah,
catapults could be involved. at times, Romans. I mean, we've all heard throwing people to the lions. So basically they could be pet food.
Yeah.
But aside from that, one might also just basically use them as sort of fodder in gladiator fights. But one of the most creative ways in which they might incorporate a criminal, and one hopes that these were at least, the really vicious bastards who deserved it. Have you must be familiar with the story of Daedalus and Icarus?
Obviously, yes.
Yes. So now imagine that you tell the story of Daedalus and Icarus, and at some point, Icarus needs to fly and then fly too high, and his wings break, and he falls from the sky. Right?
Yes.
So, in order to demonstrate that, you can, of course, take a criminal, give him some feather wings, strap him to a catapult, and catapult him across the arena.
Oh my!
Have I lost you, or
no, I'm still here. Just...
So yes, there's something almost Pythonesque about the cruelty involved. Because you can literally imagine. You can sort of see someone hanging in midair, furiously flapping those wings, trying somehow to maintain altitude.
Let me be the one person for whom this actually works.
Yes, precisely. Yeah.
Horrific.
And I mean, it could become pretty graphic what they got up to. But yes, Icarus being catapulted across the arena is an interesting way of incorporating execution in
theatre. Yes.
In theatre, yes.
Which is quite funny now that we execute people in theatre different ways. EC90 finally says, have you seen The 400 Blows? It is that good. The
400 Blows? No, never heard of that.
1959 French drama. The story of a 13-year-old whose adventures were based on the director's own adolescence as he finds comfort at the cinema.
Les 400 coups. No, I can't say I know this.
Yes. Won the Cannes Film Festival.
I'm always suspicious when I hear Cannes Film Festival. I have seen some films that, how do we say, made it feel like an eternity. Because one was being terribly, terribly artistic, and there is only so long you can watch someone walk down a beach before you lose the will to live.
It's funny because the final scene is him walking down the beach.
Well.
I don't know.
Oh well, that was who knows? Perhaps I have made a previous encounter of this film.
I don't know if that constitutes the last 39 minutes of the film or something. I don't know.
But if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was EC90 that pointed me towards 1, 2, 3, which is a cracker of a film. So that's with Jimmy Cagney as the CEO of Coca-Cola in Berlin after the war.
Okay.
And as far as film comedies go, that one is really, really funny. All the Germans are still, all the Germans who are now working for Coca-Cola are still clicking their heels. Whenever he gives an order, can you get that done? Jawohl! And you just go, and he winces every time, go, oh, for heaven's sake, how many times have I told you, please stop clicking your heels? So they're all still in full Nazi mode, but of course none of them ever had anything to do with that sort of thing, But yeah, it really is a wonderful film to watch. 1, 2, 3. So it could well be that Les 400 coups could be very good.
EC90 in a chat is saying 400 Blows is considered to be the greatest film of all time by a lot of critics. I think it is probably the greatest film of all time, personally. So there you go. He's giving you a thorough recommendation there, Britisher, that you should swallow your hubris.
Maybe he is just luring me into a trap, and I will end up watching someone walk along a beach or through it. I remember distinctly seeing a film once where there was an endless shot of someone walking through a desert. And then, as they walk through the desert towards the camera, then letting off an almighty roar, an almighty scream into the camera. Isn't that some sort of psychological therapy or whatever, where you scream? I'm sure I've heard of this.
Yes, scream therapy is a thing.
Scream therapy. There you go. It's almost kind of taking it to the ultimate height of just roaring your despair into the camera, and you just look at this, and you just go, "Oh God, please shoot me! I don't want to see another minute's more of this film." But, yes, I hope Les Quatre Cents Coups is a little more than that.
The funny thing for me is like when you you're looking for films to watch which have extra tags. So you're going, what kind of film do I feel like? And I go, there's a difference between a sci-fi film and a cerebral film. And as far as I can tell, if it's a cerebral film, it's so up its own arse that it's something where nothing is ever explained, and like it's designed. It's supposed to come off as like slightly sort of surreal, and it's to make you think and to question the nature of your own humanity or whatever. But in reality, it ends up being very poorly written, thematically driven stuff.
Fellini always had a white horse walk through his film in one scene or another, didn't he? He was very known as one of these artistic filmmakers.
I don't mind little directorial nudges like that, which are references to whatever, something important to the director. But when it's the whole film is just white horses walking through a field, and you go, why? Yeah.
But no, what was it? It was 1, 2, 3, which was really enjoyable, and also The Shop Around the Corner with Jimmy Stewart, which was charming. I'd never heard of this film before, and I really liked it. It was so. When it comes to EC90, he does give fairly good film recommendations.
Yes, the chat is saying the great beauty borders on that, and so I assume he means the film The Great Beauty, as opposed to the great beauty of like perfect films, which it's difficult to quantify. So very difficult. And now chat, whilst we're discussing great films, they've gone full degenerate and are discussing what a pornographically titled version of the 400 Blows would be called, which could be 400 Blokes or the 400...
No, I think it would more than likely maintain its title, wouldn't it?
Yes, that's what someone else said. Oh no, it is the porn version of the caution. Apparently there is one. I don't know. So, Green God, a Subsmear, has sent in £5. Thank you so much. No message attached. But I think we're at the end. We're coming to the end now, especially given that old Sargon is going to go and stream on his channel, Saga of a Cad, in a couple of minutes. So if you're still hungry for more biting social commentary and so on, you can go find him on there. And hopefully we'll be back next week, to give you a proper show again. I hope you've really enjoyed this evening, guys and gals. I've really enjoyed. I've certainly enjoyed presenting this to you. Bridger, have you enjoyed yourself this evening?
I think I have just about enjoyed myself. Yes,
that's good to know as well. Thank you to everyone who turned up. You really do. All your comments and the chats that you have along the side, we really enjoy those. They really keep the show moving as well, and it's great to see you all interacting. So until next time, have a fantastic week, everybody, and sleep well. Take care and goodbye.